Okay, hello everyone. Very welcome to our GREENIN Launch and Learn webinar number 50. Thanks for joining. The chair of this session is Dr. Zaheer Nasar from Cranfield University. And we have two brilliant speakers today, Tijana and Bethan. So I pass the floor to Dr. Zaheer to chair this session. Thank you, Zaheer.
Thank you so much, and welcome again. Good afternoon, or wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us for this GREENIN Micro Network Plus Lunch and Learn webinar series. And this is our webinar number 50. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I hope you would have already looked at our GREENIN Micro Network Plus website. If you didn't, please just put GREENIN Micro Network in any search engine and you will be taken to our website where you can look around what we do. But just to give you a quick overview, that introducing you to our core management team. So the project is led by Professor Pranshant Kumar, who is based at University of Surrey. And we have other colleagues as a co-lead from University of Bath, University of York, UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, University of Oxford, University of York, myself at Cranfield University, and then also from University of Bath, we had a colleague, and now they're based at Federal Institute of Hydrology in Germany. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see that we are also requesting you, there is a QR code that is to join GREENIN network now. So if you haven't done so, please can I request you to take a minute or a few moments. It's a very simple, straightforward process. It will take you just a few minutes to join. Please do join the network, and then you can get range of information of what we do, and including other events that we organize as well. So this is, as I said, this is a webinar that is number 50, but in here, the number 49 webinar that we had last month, we had a Dr. Fraser Trophy and Dr. Peter Irga. So we do this webinar series once in a month, and that is first Wednesday of every month between 12:30 to 1:30. And we always try to have two speakers. And if you're interested, you can look at our previous webinar on our YouTube channel. That is the link to that one is also in this slide as well. Next slide, please. So before we move on to our presenters for today, I just wanted to bring to your attention, we also have another sort of a research project that is GP for Streets. That is also based at University of Surrey. And as a part of the project, we are running 2 online surveys about greening at home and our street. So on this slide, there is a QR code and a link to the survey. So if it's possible, please, we would love to have your views. If you can scan the QR code or look into the link as well. Even if we finish the webinar and if you're interested to do this survey, please do reach out to us and we will be able to share this with you again. Next slide, please. So that brings me to introduce our 2 speakers. So I will start first. We are very pleased to have today Dr. Tijana Blanusa. She is a Principal Horticultural Scientist So Dr. Tijana Blanusa is a Principal Horticultural Scientist at the Royal Horticultural Society, where she leads the Ecosystem Services Research Program. Her work explores how plant traits can support healthier urban environments through cooling, rainfall mitigation, air quality improvement, and biodiversity enhancement. Based at the University of Reading, she also teaches and supervises students across undergraduate, MSc, and PhD levels. Her current research includes hedges, green walls, and sustainable planting choices for greener, more resilient spaces. So we're very pleased to have Dr. Tijana with us today. So without any further ado, I'll transfer the floor to Dr. Tijana.
Hi, yes, thank you, Zaheer. And thank you everyone for coming. I now have particularly big butterflies in my stomach because I can see the speakers from the last month's session, Fraser and Peter in the audience, and really I'm sort of, it's difficult shoes to fill, as it were, but I'll do my best. The intention of today's talk, let me just sort of expand my screen. The intention of today's talk was that I really sort of update you a little bit about the work that I have been doing in collaboration with colleagues at the University of Reading and colleagues at the University of Birmingham over the last 10 years. And I'm a plant physiologist, so my role in all four projects that I'll be sort of presenting today is really to help and advise in relation to plant science and behavioral plants, in environmental requirements of plants. But I've learned a lot about the impacts of plants, of air quality and well-being in the process through those collaborations. You have kindly mentioned that I do work for the Royal Horticultural Society. For those of you who haven't sort of been aware of RHS, we are a big membership organization. We currently have over 600,000 members in the UK and internationally. So keen gardeners who join our organization to support our work to inspire passion and excellence in the science, art, and practice of horticulture. I mean, commonly people actually just see the practice of horticulture, so they visit our gardens or flower shows, and you may have yourself heard of RHS Chelsea Flower Show or our flagship garden, RHS Wisley in Surrey. But we are also a growing science team. When I joined RHS just over 2 decades ago, we were a team of under 20 in science. And since then, we have become science and collections team. We are a team of more than 100 people. The team where I work, environmental horticulture, we are a team of 12. So yes, RHS is increasingly investing into horticultural science because we can see that, investment elsewhere is really, declining, as it were. So a couple of years ago, we've also opened, actually 5 years ago now, in 2021, we've opened our center, new science center, RHS Hilltop. We call it Home of Gardening Science, which houses all 5 science themes, the plant health, plant botany, horticultural advice, libraries and collections, and environmental horticulture as well. So that's kind of the context, of the organization I work for, because that in many ways informs the way I work as a scientist. My work is extremely applied. I mean, my training is very kind of fundamental in plant physiology and plant biochemistry, but my work and my research practice is very applied because I'm serving the RHS members and gardeners in the UK and worldwide. So when we work as RHS scientists, it's very important to push our advice, not push, but sort of display our research and information that we find very widely. And RHS website is visited by millions of visitors per year, mainly because people are looking for planting ideas and, how to solve problems, pest and disease issues. But we are also within our very big web platform, creating hubs for certain sort of more focused and related questions. And one of these hubs is on indoor plants, where if you Google RHS house plants, you will then get to the hub, which has all sorts of things from, how do you choose your plants? How do you deal with pests? Plants for different rooms, very, very practical advice. And one of these tabs within it is house plants for health, which is actually informed by the research that I have done, but also the research that I have synthesized from the works, and, most dominantly Fraser's and Peter's work, because they are the leaders worldwide in the indoor plants research and sort of pioneers of it, as it were. So this is going to be a very short one. I'm just, as a every scientist, I'm sort of starting just with a bit of a background. What can plants do for us? But I imagine all of us on the call, we don't need particular introduction. Plants have been known to improve productivity, general well-being, remove, a host of compounds, gaseous compounds from the air, also remove various pollutants and also particulate matter. So Fraser has gone into a lot of detail of that last time. So I decided that this time I'm really just going to use this presentation to highlight the work that we have done over three projects here in the UK. So when I first, most of my research is, even now, is probably 80% on outdoor planting and ecosystem services provision, cooling, flood mitigation and air quality to an extent on outdoor plants. So when we came, when we realized that RHS actually is not particularly aware of what indoor plants are doing, and that we really, part of our membership doesn't have gardens and really is very keen in growing indoor plants and wanted to know more, we came to the conclusion that we need to invest some of our time into understanding more about indoor plants so that we can advise our members better. So this is where this PhD project by our former PhD student Curtis Gabb came in, and that was a collaboration with colleague Christian Frank, who is now at the University of Birmingham, but at the time of starting the project was here in Reading. And we were lucky to get Curtis, who was a brilliant student. He now works in the industry as a sustainability and environment practitioner. We sort of really begin to learn and sort of test certain things about how indoor plants work. And that project was very plant-centered. It was really looking at species comparisons. It was mainly individual potted plants and chamber studies, where we were, in a way, just feeling our way around plants and indoor, removal of various compounds from the air. And Curtis published several papers, and of course, if you just Google Gabb and put one of our names next to it, you will be able to find it. But essentially, what his work has found is, and confirmed previous findings, was that species differences existed. We were finding species that on an individual plant level and on chamber scale were more active at removing CO2 and consequently adding humidity to the air. But the impact was very limited on a room scale. Even from estimations, he actually didn't do any measurements room scale. What we feel is probably a bigger contribution in his work was looking at nitrogen dioxide removal impact. And while the quantities removed, and we're listing all that in this paper that Curtis published in 2022, the quantities removed are relatively small, but the NO2 as a compound is harmful enough that even the removal of small quantities of it actually is significant in terms of human health outcomes. What we did find, however, and what we did speculate, is that most of the action was happening in the soil, and it was the soil moisture that was the kind of most highly correlated element of our experiment that was linked to the NO2 removal, rather than primarily what the plants were doing. But equally, you would not put a pot of wet soil in your office necessarily, and the plants are there, important as a part of the system. Following on from that, I was involved in co-supervising a project by now Dr. Jenny Berger, who has worked she was interested in taking it up a scale and going from individual potted plants and small chambers, or medium-sized chambers, to room scale. And she looked at several species. She looked at several seasons to see how adding those potted plants in quite measurable numbers. She had 6 or 12 plants in the offices, small offices real offices at the University of Reading, how they affected CO2 concentration in the unoccupied offices during the weekends, and how they affected humidity in the offices during in various times of the year. And the reason for that is because we know that plant function changes during the year, light levels change during the year, so we expected that plants will be doing different things in the summer than they would be in winter. And, lo and behold, yes, we did find that different species contribute differently to ambient humidity and exchange. There are species that contribute more and species that contribute less. There are seasonal differences. And of course, as we hypothesized, the most contribution to raising humidity comes in spring and summer because plants are more active and more, stomata are more open. But the room scale contribution in our experiment with the plant numbers we had and with the room setup we had was to ambient humidity is negligible. I mean, I've put in some photos here so that you can see what the offices looked like. They are in a new building that's quite well sealed. The doors were also sealed, and we also kind of had drought excluders on windows and doors, and nobody was coming in and out apart from Jenny, every 24 hours to look at the, reposition the sensors and change the plants. And even in that setup, we actually found absolutely, no significant differences in humidity levels in the offices between, with and without plants. So now this is because I added this slide sort of quite last minute, even though I know I'm limited in time because I called the talk Devil in the Detail, just to show you which plants we were looking at. So these are the 5 species which, we have reasons for various reasons why we've chosen them. We tested them also in control chambers, and you can see how, when you change the environment, the ratio of temperature and humidity, even the same species behave differently. There, of course, at any combination of temperature and humidity, there's differences between species. The detail is in this paper, in the link. You can also see how, what happens diurnally. As soon as you switch the light off, there's literally nothing coming out in terms of the water loss. Jenny was logging. These plants were in chambers sitting on balances where we were logging every half an hour, water loss. And so that sort of signifies what's gone into the atmosphere of the chamber. On a room scale, again, this is just a diagram of how she was arranging them in those offices that you've seen previously in the picture. So, there was a lot. This was not realistically, I think, workable. Where would you fit a computer and who, how would the person sit? But we were like, okay, the maximum that you can squeeze in into an office of a plant lover. So we were measuring where I say we, it's a royal we, Jenny was measuring how much plants were adding in terms of grams per meter cubed. So we knew what was the volume of the water that plants gave off in 24 hours by weighing the plants. And then she also had the humidity sensors in the room, and we knew what was the volume of the space. And we knew that this is what the plants are adding, but the bottom is what we are able to measure. So we know that plants is adding, a gram of water vapor per meter cubed of the room, but we're only able to measure 20% of that, if at all. And there were then no significant differences when you look at the room scale. So that is the kind of our work, which is a bit more, less, it is still applied, but still a bit more about the mechanisms and what happens. Then another project that I wanted to highlight was a work of a brilliant master student that I've had a few years back, Nalise Hen. And Nalise was super insistent that she just wanted to look at how people, interacted with plants in offices. And that was just pre-COVID 2019 that she set up an experiment where we took some plants from Reading and to an modern office building in central Reading. And she sort of positioned some plants either on people's desks or in the common spaces. And then she had surveys where she asked them questions before the plants were introduced, after they were introduced, and then after the plants were removed. Plants on individual desks were removed. And she found various positive effects on self-reported attention, creativity, productivity, and stress reduction. But obviously, and I suspect, we suspected that no impact on these sort of big questions of, health, well-being, tiredness, those things, bigger issues cannot be fixed by just, placing a plant on your desk. However, when we compared plants that were sitting on the, responses of people to plants that are on their desk and the plants that are in the break spaces, and you can see here, we've really improved the look of that, break space. If the people interacted with plants only during break times, it didn't really affect anything about what they were feeling or how they were feeling about their workspace. But the people who worked there were really, their satisfaction with the workspace really improved when they had plants on their desks. And to the point where after we finished the experiment and Elisa removed all the plants, the building manager phoned us up and said that there was an absolute uproar among the staff, and they were like not demanding, but really, really keen to have their plants back. And they were sad that the plants were lost, because even in the short period of the experiment, which was just, a master's project, couple of months, they really got kind of used to them and sort of felt sense of pride and ownership in looking after them. So it's a really small case study, but shows the potential for these plants to have a role, but also how much nuance there is in what we can and cannot claim those plants are doing, and how we position them, and where we do position them, and how we organize it. And linked to that is the final study I wanted to mention, and that is Jenny's work, which was sort of in COVID time. So it was an online survey where we've asked people about their, what they liked and didn't, how they perceived certain plants, and we were particularly interested in shape and form of plants, and how that affected how people perceive the effects of those plants. And generally, Jenny found that if people are interested and find plants beautiful, then they claim that it impacts positively their well-being, and that even we found this in some other papers as well, and we just wanted to retest it ourselves, that if people think that the plant is looks good and they like it, they actually think it has an impact on air quality, and it improves air quality. And we know, for example, the most preferred plant in this study was a rounded. So Jenny manipulated, this is a ficus and this is a ficus as well, but Jenny just manipulated the shape in Adobe or something, that people prefer these rounded contours and very deep green plants. And if people, if they were asked, which of these plants would have the biggest impact of air quality, they would go for the plants they like the most, and that's kind of lushest and greenest, even though we know from actual experiments in Jenny's previous study that actually they do very little. So yes, shape is important, rounded contours are important. What people think plants are doing makes them also read other meanings into things which may not be chemically happening. This plant 6 that you were possibly wondering what's doing there, it's our kind of control plant, so it's a dead plant. So we were just checking what's people response, can they distinguish between a living and a dead plant? And yes, they can very much so do it. But also we had some interesting qualitative responses. I mean, Jenny's survey was mainly quantitative, but we had space for qualitative, and more than 100 people had left qualitative responses, and they were basically stating things like, they actually get stressed out by a plant that's looked dead. So there's that pull, and some of them were saying that actually the reason they don't have the plant because it stresses them out if the plant dies or it's starting to decline. So there's something in it for us at the RHS in helping people learn how to look after plants and avoid the most common mistakes. We know from our work that most common mistake is overwatering. Our members are generally killing their plants by overwatering. And just to really kind of finish, to say that I'm grateful to Prashant for including Christian and myself recently on a paper that he led with Hao Sun on plants and indoor environmental quality. And my little contribution to that paper was really about something that a lot of people who are not plant biologists seem to underestimate the importance of, and that's the importance of light. I mean, the reason why plants do as little or as much as they do inside is predominantly linked to the light level and light quality. I mean, light intensity mostly, and that to a smaller degree moisture content, but light is the most limiting factor for plant function indoors. And then of course there are other things that we can discuss, that Christian has discussed, about air exchange rates and plant numbers. But to go and just assume that by putting even large number of plants in without considering these other things which affect plant function is not going to bring the desired results. And just before I go to my final slides, and thanks, just to mention a PhD project that's currently running, and I'm imagine that Marianne could possibly be one of the speakers in the future. Is our PhD student Marianne Barnard is doing a PhD which is now looking more into active indoor green walls. So the lessons we've learned with Curtis's and Jenny's PhDs, we are taking them forward and looking at how to optimize active systems for removal of various. At the moment, she's playing with several compounds. I'm not going to steal her thunder and actually report on it, because she could be talking about it herself. But she is now in her second year, and I would say watch this space, because interesting things will be coming. And on that note, I just would like to thank my many students and collaborators and colleagues from the RHS, Birmingham, Reading, and our also industry consultants, Kenneth Freeman and Richard Sabin, who are really holding our head in the process. And I will happily take questions later when it's my turn. So that's that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Tijana. Very interesting. So we'll take the questions after we had another sort of a talk from Beth. But please do write your questions in Q&A tab. So now we'll have our next presenter, Dr. Bethan Mead. So Dr. Bethan Mead is a lecturer in the Department of Psychology at the University of Liverpool, working with Appetite and Obesity Research Group. Her research combines psychological and food systems perspectives to understand eating behaviors, sustainable diets, food security, and the links between environment, health, and well-being. She also explores consumer and stakeholder perceptions of urban-grown food, including barriers to its wider acceptance. And this work builds on her previous UKRI FSA fellowship under the Transforming UK Food System Strategic Priorities Fund, and her postdoctoral research with Urban Revolution Project, where she examined the health and dietary impacts of urban agriculture. Over to you, Beth.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see my slides okay? Yep. Great, so thank you for having me. So I'm Beth Mead, I'm a psychologist at the University of Liverpool, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is a bit of an overview of work that I've done, but also work that other people have done that I'm very, very interested in, but within the realm of urban agriculture. And I know that for this webinar series, we're interested in indoor greening, so I'm coming at this through the lens of looking at urban agriculture and how we can apply that to what we know about indoor greening. So to start off, when I'm talking about urban agriculture, for the purposes of my work, I take a really, really broad definition, effectively down to just the production of fruits and vegetables in urban areas. And this can entail all different types of urban food growing, from your traditional low-tech ground-based work, such as home gardens and allotments and community gardens, to your more high-tech work or high-tech feed production systems in some of our more technologically advanced urban farms that look at horizontal and vertical growing, rooftop greening and green walls, and even hydroponic, aeroponic, aquaponic systems. So when I'm talking about urban agriculture today, I'm talking about all of these things in some way. And a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last few years has been looking at how urban agriculture has benefits for sustainability, diet quality, food insecurity, ecosystem services, and as a psychologist, our health and well-being. And what I'm going to talk to you about today specifically focuses on the elements of urban agriculture that are beneficial for sustainable diets and our health and well-being. So before we go into that in detail, I'm going to bring you back a step to have a look at our current food system, because a lot of the work I do is within a food systems umbrella. So the way we produce and consume and process our food at the moment has negative impacts on our environment, our health, and our well-being. We grow our food or produce our food away from our population centres, which then our food has to go through long supply chains, which gives it opportunities for waste, quality loss, nutritional degradation. These supply chains can have negative environmental impacts because of the length of them and the food miles involved before we actually get it to the people where they can consume it. At a personal level, we have issues with our food consumption around the type of food that we eat, not being the best for us, perhaps in terms of nutrition and our health, but also because we have this lengthy supply chain or this lengthy disconnect between our food production and our food systems and where our population centres are, is potentially also driving a disconnect with nature and disconnecting people from where their food comes from. And we proposed through a project that I was involved in through my postdoc called Urban Revolution that this sort of food system is driving 3 crises: a sustainability crisis, a resilience crisis, and a health crisis. So that leads us to the question of what if we were to reorient this food system and bring food production back to our population centres. So this is what a potential food system could look like. By bringing food back to our population centres, we could potentially be reducing the environmental degradation caused by our lengthy supply chains and production methods. We could reduce the opportunity for quality loss and wastage because food is getting to people quicker and it's fresher, it's potentially healthier, people have more access to healthy food, and it's reconnecting people with nature and our food production and reconnecting people with our food system. So this is the sort of rationale behind a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about today. So that idea of a reoriented food system looks great, but what we wanted to do is actually see, is this possible? And our data tells us that potentially, yes, it is. So some work I was involved in a couple of years ago, led by Lael Walsh at Lancaster University, we looked at the productive potential of urban areas in the UK for growing fruit and vegetables. This was modelling work, and at its absolute maximum, we found that our urban areas in the UK could produce up to 8 times our current domestic production of fruit and vegetables. And this is more than enough to give people in our urban areas their 5 a day. Obviously, this is a hypothetical scenario. This would involve using all of our urban green spaces, which we don't want to do because we still want them for recreation and leisure. However, what it tells us that even just using a little bit more of them could have really significant potential benefits for urban food production and bringing that fruit and veg to people. We also looked at the yields possible through urban agriculture and increasing our urban growing. And through a meta-analysis, we found that our urban food growing methods that we use, particularly some of our higher tech methods such as hydroponics, can be perhaps more, they can produce an equal or even a greater yield of crops compared to conventional agriculture methods. And of hopeful interest to this audience, we found that some of our urban growing methods, such as our hydroponic methods, the yields from those were equivalent to other forms of urban growing, such as outdoor green spaces. And some of our fruits and vegetables, such as tomatoes and cucumbers and gherkins, might actually be more productive when we produce them in using urban agricultural methods. Oh, sorry, my slide didn't advance. Okay, so we've got the potentials to do it at scale. What are the benefits for the people? So some of the work I've done over the last few years has been looking at the potential benefits of urban agriculture for sustainable diets. And the rationale behind is that if we bring healthy, sustainable food closer to people, it makes it easier to access and can support healthy diet consumption. So on the left here, I've got a diagram of part of a structural equation model that I worked on. This was a large-scale study where we looked at trying to map out how urban agriculture could support diet or is associated with improved diet quality for a large sample of UK consumers. And what we found was that people who report a greater proximity to or engagement with, so that's an important distinction, like you not necessarily have to be engaged with urban agriculture, just being near it, also reported greater health and sustainable food choice motivations and had a higher or a more healthy diet quality. We've also seen that through some work that we've done that urban agriculture supports food security and diet by increasing access and availability to these foods. Availability to healthy, sustainable foods, and others have shown that urban agriculture, engagement in urban agriculture can promote a shift to lower carbon diets. So it tells us that there are some benefits of upscaling our urban agricultural production for healthy, sustainable diets. In terms of health and well-being, we also see positives here. So there's a wealth of literature that reports increases in positive mood and increased psychological well-being from engagement in urban agriculture. I've referenced a paper from Zaheer and Cox here that looked at this in allotment gardeners, looking at it more on a small scale. And then some work that I did during the COVID-19 pandemic identified that engagement in home food growing could potentially have some sort of protective effect over well-being. So we found that people who were engaged in home food growing during that first lockdown, they also reported higher well-being. So we wondered if potentially there's some sort of protective effect going on there in terms of giving people a focus during a challenging time and to increase their well-being. As a psychologist, I'm interested in the mechanisms of how all these things work. And so what we're still trying to unpick some of these, but what we think it is happening is that these benefits are happening through people's engagement in urban agriculture. It's a form of nature exposure. When it's in a community setting, that sense of community cohesion helps people. It provides an opportunity for physical activity. And we think it also supports a general feeling of well-being and achievement. And for how this could work, we're still trying to unpick this. Some work that I'm literally just finished a couple of weeks ago with the Growing Health Project, which is a grant of mine, to try and explore the psychological mechanisms that underpin the benefits that urban agriculture has, suggests that it potentially could work through what we call attention restoration theory, which if anybody's not familiar with, I'll just explain really quickly. But effectively, our lives right now are really, really busy and stressful, and it fatigues our attention. It drives mental fatigue. And there's evidence that suggests that spending time in or viewing nature scenes can restore that attention and improve our attentional focus and well-being. And we think that urban agriculture could have some of these benefits through these mechanisms and increasing our connection with nature. And we know from the nature connection literature that this is associated with things such as reduced blood pressure, with cardiovascular disease, stress, improvements to well-being, mental health, and potentially also healthier dietary choices. So how does this relate to indoor greening? So there's a lot of work, and I know that speakers in this series have probably already talked about some of this, but some of the work that's looked at how indoor nature exposure to plants and green spaces in an indoor setting can reduce negative emotions, blood pressure, physiological and psychological stress, and some have even reported fewer sick days at work. And on the positive side, others have reported increased positive perceptions, well-beings, impressions of comfort and calmness, and even hospital stay outcomes. So this work isn't mine, this comes from others in the field, but some of this work has looked at the effects of actually getting people to pot on plants in indoor settings and care for plants in indoor settings, and people have reported these sort of psychological, physiological benefits at self-report level. So what does that mean for urban agriculture? So we know that indoor greening has these benefits. So what about if we did indoor growing and we did indoor urban agriculture? So this is something that I'm just starting some work on, but others have already been doing some work on it. So I want to highlight a couple of papers here that I found really, really interesting when I was preparing this talk. So McLean and colleagues did a project with NHS staff where they gave them a windowsill veg growing kit over 12 weeks, and which you can see in the top right there. And they reported, the people in the programme reported improvements to their well-being. And then, really interestingly, Rowe and colleagues have reported on a study that gave patients with cancer indoor hydroponics kits. This is the high-tech growing methods that we've seen in our work through Urban Revolution that could be quite potentially have quite a good production yield. And they looked at various outcomes to look at people's improvements in health. But just to show you here, so looking at across this sample, they saw that over the course of 8 weeks, engagement and nurturing and consuming food from these hydroponics kits, people reported significant reductions in measures of depression, improvements in quality of life and emotional functioning, improvements in appetite loss, and this on the top right here, really, really interesting to us, an increase in consumption of fruits and vegetables. So what these sort of these new studies are kind of tentatively showing us is that actually the urban agriculture benefits that we see when we've been looking at it from that really, really broad scale approach might actually distill down to have those same benefits for people doing it indoors. So where does that leave us? So we know that urban agriculture seems to support sustainable, healthy diets, people's health and their well-being. We've got evidence that shows us that indoor urban agriculture could have similar benefits, but we need to explore this a little bit more. When I've done work with communities looking at barriers to taking part in urban agriculture, the things that come up time and time and again are issues around accessibility, access, resources and skills. And so I want to highlight some of the work that I've literally just finished a few weeks ago, this Growing Health project that you wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. But one of the things we want to do is to explore ways to make urban agriculture or engagement in urban agriculture more accessible to people that want to do it. So we've just finished up some co-design work, designing a potential food growing intervention for people living in our deprived urban communities. And I'm still analysing the data that's come from that. But really interestingly, a lot of our community members have focused on that home-based indoor kitchen windowsill growing. So what we'd like to do now, and what if anybody's interested in talking about further, I'd be happy to, is find a way to actually scale that up to some sort of toolkit or course or intervention or something that could make that urban agriculture engagement at a home level accessible to people in communities who perhaps might not have access to a community garden, but they can still have those benefits indoors. So that is everything that I wanted to talk about. I'm very happy to take questions, and thank you again for the opportunity to share this with you.
Thanks, Beth. That's very interesting. So I think we can move to now questions. So please, I can see we do have some questions for Tijana, but please send your question into the Q&A tab there. So maybe we can start with the questions now, and then I'll start with the first question to Tijana. So Tijana, there's a question, in your view, what is the most important factor that determines whether indoor plants actually perform well indoors? For instance, plant species, number of plants, light availability, growing medium, moisture, or room ventilation rate? So
I mean, I feel like, Fraser and Peter should be answering this question. But yeah, if you've put me on the spot, I would say the number of plants and the system they're growing in, plus room ventilation rate. And that, I mean, all of it really. But also when you think of a plant, I'm already making an assumption that it has to be a healthy, optimally looked after plant, because that's the basis of anything. If you have one of these dead ones, like in Jenny's survey, of course, you're not getting any service. So I would say physiologically active plants, and by that I mean, I've explained in one other response, when I talk to RHS members, I talk to them, they can relate to something that I call thirsty plant. Generally a thirsty plant, the one that uses more water, is because the stomata are open and plants growing quite actively. So common house plants that are quite thirsty, for example, Epipremnum, devil's ivy, is quite active. Chlorophytum comosum, spider plant, is also quite active. There may be a few others. So not the ones, not mother-in-law's tank, Sansevieria is not, it's very much water conserving plant. So something that's very physiologically active. If you are thinking about the removal of those macro compounds, but it also means, like when I say macro, that's, you know, CO2 or adding to the humidity. I mean, there is a lot of nuance, which I think maybe certainly I, as a scientist, get lost into, because, you know, if you're talking about some in inverted commas micro compounds or different mechanisms whereby, you know, pollutants are removed, or you're looking at particles, then there are other things. But anyway, not to scare any building manager who is wanting to do it, I would say as many plants as you can possibly put in well-lit spaces, not overwatered and not underwatered. I mean, overwatering is one of the most common reasons, as I said in my talk, for plants not doing well. I suspect commercially it could also be underwatering, so optimal watering, but that's literally like you touch the substrate and you see, is it dryish? If it's dryish, water. If it's wet, of course you don't. And then it can all be overridden by room ventilation. I mean, room ventilation rate has a huge impact. So we could get everything right in terms of the plants, but the way you're ventilating the space can override the impact, especially if you have a small number of plants. And we see, for example, in Jenny's experiment, you know, we are doing them, she's doing them over 2 weekends in January. One weekend we get one total, you know, one picture of what's happening in those rooms with the plants. Same plants, the weekend later, same building, same internal temperature in the building, and not completely, but significantly different reasons. And we look at what's happening. The second Saturday was much windier. So our building wasn't ventilated, but even though the windows were kind of sealed as much as we could seal them, the fact that it was so windy must have changed the ventilation rates in the room, and it's changed the outcome. So, but on the other hand, I also don't want to, that's why we've moved with our research, and I think Beth is also sort of hinting at that, is we've moved away from obsession with just air quality necessarily indoors, especially in large spaces. There's so many other things that plants do to us. So even if they don't move an inch, the CO2 concentration, and that needs to be mitigated by ventilation or opening the window if you're a homeowner. The well-being impacts, the impacts that, you know, we are only just scratching the surface with on people's motivation, on people's work performance, satisfaction with the workplace, their, you know, enjoyment in the place. You know, I'm not even claiming any of those like big questions about the, you know, that Beth's looking at, the, you know, the essence of well-being. No, this is just like, do I like my office when I come into it? I think some of these, you know, are priceless. Maybe I'm overstating, but I think that's also, yeah.
Thanks, Tijana. So I think you already mentioned a bit about the building managers. There is another question that if you were advising building managers, what would be the minimum evidence-based recommendation for using indoor plants without overclaiming their air quality benefits? I think you touched on this, but
yeah, I have, and
yeah,
I've written also a reply, but I can see there's some questions for Beth emerging, so I don't want to, you know, start repeating myself.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at it. Hang on, I think. Let me check. Is there any question at the moment for Beth in QA? Okay, there's a question from Peter to Beth. Okay, there is a growing interest in using indoor plants and green spaces to deal with trauma. For example, with veterans are in prisons to help reduce anxiety and even aggression. What are your thoughts on this?
Really interesting point. Thank you, Peter. I think it's a great idea. I haven't done this myself, and I'm not fully aware of work and findings from others that have, but I know from some of the work that we've done, so the qualitative work that I mentioned that I'm just wrapping up now, one of the things we're seeing in the early analysis is a lot of the people in the community garden settings were talking about that sense of achievement and pride and ownership and just the positive feedback they got from being able to care for the plants and see them grow and have a product at the end. So I imagine those sorts of benefits would probably translate really, really well to settings like that. But yeah, I'd be definitely interested in looking into that in a bit more detail.
Okay, there's another question for Beth. For indoor urban agriculture, do you think the main benefit is likely to be food production, psychological well-being, education and engagement, or a combination of these?
I think it's probably going to be a combination of the whole thing. I think each of those things on their own are really important benefits, But especially if we're talking about small scale production, for example, on people's windowsills, balconies and homes, it's the yield of the food produced is probably not going to be enough to have an enormous dietary impact. But we know from psychological literature that there's a bidirectional relationship between things like psychological well-being and dietary quality. So if we're able to bolster or help people make improvements to their well-being, we might have a secondary effect of improving dietary quality. But from the work that I've done and the work I've seen, these benefits, it's the combination of them all, and they all interact.
Okay, I think I'll quickly touch another one for Beth. You mentioned both proximity to food growing and active engagement with growing, okay? Which one seems more important for changing dietary behavior? Simply making fresh produce more available or involving people directly in the growing process?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked a lot, actually. From my data, they're both really important. I think just the proximity and making the food more available has benefits for a larger range of people because there's more people that can access the food. But we know that the actual physical engagement in it also has the benefits in terms of increasing physical activity, social connection, sense of belonging and well-being. So I think that it's not a case of one's probably more beneficial than the other. I think it's just different types of benefits. But it's really reassuring to see that even just proximity and having it visible has benefits for people, because not everybody wants to get involved in it, but we can still share those benefits other ways.
Okay, good. I think that I can now go back to Tijana. Tijana, the question that you mentioned that different species contribute differently to humidity and CO2 exchange. For non-specialist users, are there any simple plant selection rules that are evidence-based rather than just aesthetic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen from Jenny's work that aesthetic also influences, people's response to a space. They could make them think that, a plant is doing something which it isn't necessarily. So I would say generally anything that, is, the bigger the better, both indoors and outdoors. The plant size impacts the extent of environmental effect that it will have. So I would say, larger canopies, lush, rounded, deep green species are going to be more efficient, more physiologically active plants for the pollutants which are removed through the stomatal pathway, and that's the proxy for that is the thirstier plant. So go for something that's relatively bigger. Go for something that requires uses reasonable amounts of water, because it means that it's kind of pumping elements through it that are then taken and metabolized and sort of turned into some other things that are less pollutant. So yeah, large, physiologically active. And I also think, like what Beth was saying, co-creation, involvement of people who use the spaces in the decision of what can be used. I mean, some pre-decision can be made by saying, okay, we are going to go for these 3 species, but then ask people what would they like. And then certainly, for it to be successful and we don't end up with dead plants, much like with food growing, you either have some central, if you're an organization, some centralized way of managing the plants where maybe there's a technician who goes around and just checks the plants, or you provide training to the staff, or, have a pioneers, within the staff who are very green-fingered, who help the others not to kill their plants. I apologize if that sounds very basic, because I don't quite know who's in the audience, so I'm sort of mixing the levels of explanation. But yes, I think that's possibly what I would say at this point.
Thanks, Tijana. And I think we can take one last question, and that is for Beth, okay? Now, Beth, the question is, there is a context to that. You showed that urban agriculture can support healthier and more sustainable diets as well as well-being, but also that access, resources, and skills are key barriers. Now, in deprived urban communities, what do you think is the most important condition for making urban agriculture genuinely effective rather than just a nice but unequal intervention?
That's a really good question. Thank you. This is something that I've just been looking at in the co-design workshops, and something that Tijana's just said really, really maps on really well to this. But what we're seeing is when we actually talk to these communities, is like, right, what would it actually take? What do you need? Some of the key things that are coming out is taking away the financial risk, especially for our most disadvantaged communities. So a lot of people talk about how they'd like to have a go, but they can't afford to go out and buy compost, seeds, tools, and so on. So actually provision of those in an equitable, like dignified way, but also longevity. A lot of the things, some of the things that have come out of the community work that I've been doing recently is that saying it's all well and good being able to plant a seed, but actually what support throughout the entire process to harvest and then use of the food in cooking skills. So what it's kind of showing us is that it's not just a case of giving people the equipment and leaving them to get on with it. It's supporting them through the entire process so they learn and have an accessible, appropriate way of being able to relay that information in a way that's appropriate for the community. So kind of that almost a personalised approach, I think, is going to be really important here.
Thank you, Beth. And with that, I think we have now all the time we have used for the questions, but it was really, I think I really enjoyed. There was really good questions, very thought-provoking. So thanks, Tanya and Tijana and Beth for really sort of engaging in the questions. And now it's the time to move towards closing this webinar. But before we close, I would like to sort of share with you the information about our next GREENIN Lunch and Learn webinar that will be, and the next one is we have again two presenter. One is Professor Avtar Matharu. They will be they are based at University of York, and then again we have an early career researcher, Dr. Toby Carter, who is a PDRA at University of York as well. So please do register. There's a very big QR sign there. I can see it on the left side. Do register for this next webinar, and I can see my colleagues are changing the date. There was a typo, but next one is on the 5th of August, our next Lunch and Learn webinar. So we will have I'm sure you will enjoy and learn from our next webinar as well. So please do register for our next webinar. Is there any next slide? So I'll now close. We're very thankful to Dr. Tijana and Dr. Beth for joining us today. I hope that all the colleagues who are present today and who have joined us, whichever part of the world, they found it very interesting. I found that it was very interesting and thought-provoking, especially looking at the plant sort of physiology and also linking it back to some of the health outcomes beyond the air quality. So again, thank you so much to our presenters. And also, I would like to thank our colleagues from the GREENIN team, Helen, Kanika, and also Sharon. They are doing great job at the back end to run this so successfully and seamlessly. It's not I just stand up and sit here, and I think those are the people who deserve all the credit that goes behind organizing such a successful webinar series. And I'm returning you 1 or 2 minutes back to your calendar today. Thank you very much. It was great to see you, and hopefully we'll see you again in a month time. Thanks. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Beth. Oh no, Beth's gone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.
Bye, Tijana.